It was precisely 12:03 a.m. on May 2nd, 1988, when the rear parking lot of Willow Creek Hall plunged into total darkness. The security records would subsequently reveal that this was not an intended blackout. It was not a power surge. It was not even an accident. The lights had been intentionally cut. And in those brief, ill-fated seconds of utter darkness, 19-year-old Lucy Wilson vanished without a sound. Welcome to Hidden County, Alabama, population 4,732. It's the kind of place where everyone knows your name, your business, and if you're not careful, your secrets. Or at least, that's what everyone thought. For 41 long years, this close-knit small town thought they knew just who was to blame for what occurred that spring evening, just after the prom, when Lucy went outside for some air and never returned. They were mayor. If you're drawn to those cold cases that suddenly find new life, those long-forgotten mysteries that finally get solved, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, because this is one of those stories the authorities never expected to see resolved. 3 innocent men would bear the heavy burden of suspicion for over 4 decades. One family would endure more than 15,000 days of unsolved questions. And the actual killer? He walked among them, punching the clock at work, depositing his paycheck, and bearing his dark secret to the grave. But this isn't simply a tale of a murder. It's of how one small strand of hair, a bit of evidence lost in time, ultimately spoke the truth that shook everything to its core. This was the case that split Hidden County, until DNA proof brought it together again in shared astonishment. Lucy Wilson was more than just a friendly smith and friendly sleepers. She was the girl everyone could recall in Hidden County, the one whose laughter had the power to fill a room, whose goodness touched people from all stations of life. Born on August 12, 1968, to Robert and Margaret Wilson, Lucy was the second child of a tight-knit family. Her big brother, James, idolized her from the day she was born. The Wilsons were highly regarded people in town. Robert was a mechanical engineer at the local factory, and Margaret was an English teacher at Hidden County High. They weren't affluent, but their house was filled with warmth, discipline, and affection. Education and compassion were the pillars of the family. Lucy took after her father's logical intellect and her mother's literary soul. By the time she entered her final year of school, she'd maintained a flawless 4.0 GPA while serving as editor of the school paper and vice president of the debate club. Her bedroom walls were almost wallpapered with letters of acceptance to college, Auburn, Alabama, and her first-choice school, Northwestern University, which had granted her a partial journalism scholarship. Lucy had this ability to make you feel listened to, says her closest friend, Donna Matthews. She was not into the superficial high school nonsense. When she asked how you were doing, she meant it. Her journalism instructor, Mr. Harold Bennett, declared her the best writer he had encountered in 2 decades. Her piece on county veterans had even placed in a statewide contest and appeared in the Birmingham News, a source of pride that glowed through. When Lucy was 16, her father didn't just give her the keys. He taught her how to change a tire, check the oil, and drive herself. He surprised her with a light blue 1983 Pontiac Sunbird that day, too. She called it Bluebell. She kept it perfectly clean, and years later, that same car would be evidence item number 1 in a 4-decade search. But Lucy wasn't all book and duty. She had a wicked streak, a wry, quick-wit She enjoyed her collection of vinyl records, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers being her favorite, and on every Saturday, she worked at the public library reading children's stories. In Hidden County, where Friday night football and Sunday church suppers dominated the social schedule, Lucy fit in everywhere. She was not the most popular girl at school, but not an outsider. She was in that rare natural middle place. Everybody liked her. Everybody liked her. Everybody liked her. Everybody liked her. Everybody was like her base. Everybody liked her. Everybody loved so Zorsti. If you'd asked anyone at Hidden County High who was most likely to succeed, people still say Lucy Wilson's name would have been right there at the top. By spring 1988, Lucy, like all seniors, was juggling that bittersweet combination of hope and regret. Graduation in just weeks, college, her Northwestern University future, awaiting on the horizon. It all seemed in place. Her life was mapping out well, as bright and promising and then prom night. The prom theme of that year, Forever Young, was taken from the Rod Stewart song played over and over on local radio. For weeks on end, Willow Creek Hall, which was Hidden County's venue of choice for every major community function, was made over by a group of hardworking parents. Silver and blue streamers were draped from the ceilings, fairy lights glowed like stars, and one of them had even set up a corner back-keyed to the back to a corner, but you will back keyed especially. Funny thing, Lucy hadn't even thought about going. With college essays, scholarship applications, and a part-time job to fill out, prom was the furthest thing from her mind. But 3 weeks prior to prom night, David Carter, a shy, reserved kid from her AP Physics class, had asked her out. He did it so clumsily that Donna Matthews, Lucy's best friend, said Lucy couldn't possibly refuse. It wasn't a romance, not by any stretch. Davy Iffy, Davy Elbieri, Davy Biddy, Davy. His mother was fighting cancer, and Lucy said she felt that everyone should have one perfect memory leading up to graduation. Donna and Lucy prepared together at the Matthews house on prom night. Lucy wore a midnight blue off-shoulder prom dress with intricate silver embellishments, a bargain from a shopping trip to Birmingham. Its purchase had been insisted upon by her mother, Margaret. Sometimes, she'd smiled, a girl needs to be like a girl needs to be like a Soviet, a girl to be like a Tilov, a girl needs to be like even a practical girl like you. David arrived on schedule at 7 p.m. in his dad's borrowed Buick. Margaret clicked dozens of pictures on the front lawn, Lucy acting embarrassed but truly radiating happiness, and David stiffly posing in his rented tuxedo, looking nervous and proud. "You look really nice," he told her as they drove off to pick up another couple for their double date. Lucy smiled, thanked him, and then immediately eased his nerves by chatting about their upcoming physics final. That was just Lucy, kind, considerate, never letting anyone feel out of place. They made it to Willow Creek Hall at about 7:45 p.m. The old house, a renovated plantation house from 1857 perched on the outskirts of town among huge oak trees covered in Spanish moss. Its majestic ballroom had witnessed generations of milestones for Hidden County's milestones, weddings, reunions, even some raucous political fundraisers. The parking lot was getting full by the time Lucy and David got there. Teenagers wearing sparkling dresses and rented formal wear left and rushed towards the entrance, tension in the air. Security by modern standards was next to none, 2 parent chaperones at the door checking tickets and a single rented security guard circulating the parking lot to ensure that no one was bringing in booze. Small-town Alabama in the 1980s, the epitome of not trusting people. Nobody gave much notice to security guard Henry Hank Monroe as he circled that night. He was another familiar face doing his thing. Inside, Lucy and David sat at a table close to the dance floor with their friends. Witnesses later reported that Lucy was calm and joyful looking. She danced a few times, some with David, others with her friends, and even took photos in front of the painted stars backdrop, first with her date and then with a group of laughing girlfriends. At about 10:30 p.m., Lucy had excused herself to console a younger girl who'd had a disagreement, and then at approximately 11:15 p.m., she was seen at the food table, laughing at something Donna had whispered in her ear, taking a sip of fruit punch. Everything felt perfectly normal, recalled Jason Whitaker, another senior who'd known Lucy since grade school. "If you'd told me that was the last night anyone would ever see her, I'd have said you were crazy." There were no warning signs, no wacky strangers, nothing out of place, say. At approximately 11:55 p.m., Lucy turned to Donna and told her she had to go outside for some fresh air. The ballroom was sweltering from all the dancing going on, and the air conditioning couldn't keep up. She also said she'd left her cardigan in the back of her car, Blue Bell, and the night air had started to get cool. I offered to go with her, Donna told investigators later, but she just smiled and said she'd be right back biz. Donna's voice still trembles when she recalls those words. 3 other students subsequently reported observing Lucy head to the rear exit of Willow Creek Hall that evening. One of them, Mitchell Turner, had been outside for a brief cigarette against school policy. Naturally, he recalled seeing Lucy around midnight. She seemed like she was in a rush, Mitchell said to detectives, but not afraid. She just nodded at me as she walked by. I assumed Shez nodded at me as she walked by. I assumed Shez. The rear parking lot was poorly lit, only faintly illuminated by 3 old overhead lights. There were approximately 60 cars spread out on cracked asphalt. Lucy's light blue Pontiac Blue Bell sat in the 3rd row, approximately 40 yards from the building. At 12:03 a.m. precisely, the lights died. Not flickered, died. 17 minutes had elapsed when the security guard reset the breakers and restored the lights. But by then, loosed the break. Her purse was discovered the following morning, half tucked away under a rhododendron bush close to where her vehicle was parked. It contained her lipstick, her house key, $43 in currency. What wasn't there? Her car keys. Leave a comment below. Where were you in 1988? Or were you even born yet? Let us know as we continue to dig deeper into this spooky Alabama enigma that took over 4 decades to finally solve. By 12:45 a.m., David Carter, Lucy's prom date, had already informed 3 chaperones, telling them Lucy had stepped outside and not returned. At first, no one panicked. Teenagers sneaking away from dances wasn't exactly front-page news in Hidden County. Most assumed Lucy had slipped out with friends, but David wasn't letting it go. She wouldn't just leave, he insisted. That's not who she is. When the clock rang 1:30 a.m. and the final tracks faded away, Lucy's disappearance could no longer be overlooked. While students overflowed into the parking lot, chattering and hurrying off to bed, her blue Pontiac sat parked, silent, unmoved, and out of place in the draining lot. David and some classmates began to search independently. They scoured the bathrooms, the coat room, even the dank basement storage space. Nothing. Officer Thomas Brewer pulled up just after 2:15 a.m., having been called by worried Lucy's mother, Margaret Wilson, when her daughter had not come home. What he saw did not feel right from the beginning. Lucy's vehicle was locked. No forced entry signs, no broken glass, no gravel scuffle marks, just nothing. But there were no prints in the Looster, no drag marks, nothing to suggest anyone had ever been there. It was like she disappeared into thin air, Brewer would later testify. By dawn, the secluded town of Hidden County had become a full-scale search area. A dozen officers, volunteer firemen, and close to 100 residents combed the surrounding woods. They scoured drainage ditches, old barns, even vacant culverts on the old highways. The county sheriff's crime scene unit arrived at 7:30 a.m. They worked over Lucy's car inch by inch, but found nothing. No foreign fingerprints, just Lucy's and her family's. No traces of blood, no struggle. Just one thing missing, her set of car keys, which were never to be found. And then Detective Samuel Morgan, 2 decades on the force and as keen an eye as ever, picked up on something small but unusual. One strand of brown hair stuck to the metal handrail of the back stairs, the same stairs where Lucy was last standing. He removed it cautiously, bagged in evidence, and shipped it off to the state crime lab. But in 1988, DNA analysis was essentially science fiction, still in its infancy, still costly, and only employed if there was an in-custody suspect. The hair waited, locked away, forgotten. For 3 decades and 5 years, as, and first, last, and 5 years, Gimwazan, as Krausdorff the War. Forgotten for 3 decades. The town that had once left doors ajar and children to run freely suddenly became suspicious, nervous. Parents clung to their children. Hardware stores ran out of locks and motion-sensitive lights. Neighbors began looking at each other with quiet suspicion. "It changed everything," said former Mayor Harold Jenkins. All of a sudden, folks were viewing their neighbors differently. The faith that had always characterized our town, gone, like that. Within the first week, 3 men had come under suspicion, each for different reasons. Each would bear that heavy, silent burden of suspicion for decades. He was the one student who'd spied Lucy outside that evening while sneaking a cigarette. His account of timing, precisely when he'd returned indoors, changed incrementally in subsequent interviews. Perhaps nerves, perhaps memory, but to desperate investigators looking for clues, those discrepancies were like sirens. Mitchell was 19 and hardly a model student. He'd had a few run-ins on his juvenile record, some graffiti, a couple of school fights, small stuff, the sort of teenage errors most everyone outgrows. But after Lucy disappeared, those earlier missteps suddenly appeared an awful lot grimmer. Individuals I had known my entire life would not even glance at me anymore, Mitchell explained to the Hidden County Gazette in 2010. My mother received anonymous phone calls telling her that I should be incarcerated. I lost job offers, girlfriends quit calling, all due to being in the wrong place at the wrong time. He was a 34-year-old mechanic who had worked on Lucy's Pontiac twice during the months leading up to her disappearance. An anonymous tip, no name, no evidence, accused Billy of making off-color remarks about women at his shop. Police searched his house and garage and discovered nothing at all, but the rumor itself was sufficient to ruin his life. Billy's shop was the most popular garage in town, retired police officer James Kelly said. A month later, it was almost deserted. Folks would not bring their vehicles there. His wife was no longer invited to no longer invited to view VX less. His wife was no longer invited to just for reasons such as often stomach aches live. His children were bullied at school, all due to a tale that was never substantiated. He was among the parent chaperones present that evening. A well-respected banker, a 2-time father, and yes, he had been observed conversing with Lucy earlier in the evening. What the town didn't realize was that their exchange had been harmless. He'd been discussing college financial aid with her, something completely within his realm as a banker. When police found out Davidson had stepped away from the prom for around 30 minutes, he claimed it was to get more ice for the punch bowl. Rumors ran rampant. Even when security tapes at a nearby gas station corroborated his tale, the damage was already done. The Davidsons left town in 1990, recalled Donna Matthews. Mrs. Davidson couldn't stand the whispers anymore. Their son came home from school with bloody noses, bullying kids who called his father a murderer. As the months went by and no fresh leads emerged, Hidden County divided into 2 camps. Those who thought Mitchell was guilty stopped purchasing produce from his parents' farm stand. Families who stood up for the Davidsons were left off guest lists. Even the First Baptist Church congregation split after the pastor had preached mercy for the accused, infuriating parishioners who wanted justice to be served for Lucy. Meanwhile, the Wilson family was disintegrating. Robert Wilson, Lucy's dad, went on leave from his work and spent his days driving dusty side roads, hoping to find his daughter. Margaret, a former favorite English teacher, ceased teaching altogether. She couldn't stand classrooms full of girls Lucy's age, and their son James went out of school to return home, his own future quietly sidetracked by loss. 3 months later, the official search for Lucy Wilson was reduced. The case remained open, technically, but the investigation had turned cold, and no one kept an eye on Henry Hank Munro, the night watchman, the man who called in the tripped circuit breaker at 12:20 a.m., the guy who was charged with keeping everyone safe. And no one ever bothered to ask the questions that came most obviously to mind. Why hadn't he noticed or heard a thing for those 17 minutes of complete darkness? Why had the why had the blitz, I worried the bleep, light of girl, no one suspected the unobtrusive man who went on working at Willow Creek Hall for another 15 years. The same man who had gone to Lucy Wilson's memorial service. The same man who even contributed $50 to the reward kitty for leads on her case. The best suspect is usually the last one you think of, the one literally standing in your face, existing in plain sight. As 1988 gave way to 1989, the dazzling brilliance of scrutiny surrounding Lucy Wilson's vanishing gradually dimmed. The news vans departed, the flyers turned yellow, and the formerly clamorous search lines fell silent. Time, however, did not heal for the Wilson family, it merely stopped. That first Christmas without Lucy was intolerable. Her parents could not force themselves to open her presents, so they remained under the tree until February, each one a reminder of denial, of love that would not let go. Margaret Wilson left Lucy's bedroom as is, her acceptance to Northwestern University still proudly displayed on the bulletin board. A partially completed journalism assignment lay on the desk, awaiting its owner to return. By 1993, 5 long years now, case file had mushroomed, 247 interviews, 122 possible leads, and 0 answer. Detective Morgan, the very same one who had first spotted that wispy strand of brown hair, would not let go. Even when other cases called out to him, he remained with Lucy's file. "I gave my word to Robert Wilson," he explained to his team, "and I'm going to keep it." The Wilsons' suffering did not go away. It merely took a different form. Robert suffered from insomnia that no drug could cure. Margaret formally quit teaching. Seeing other children grow up was too painful to endure. Their son James found relationships almost impossible. "I couldn't commit to anyone," he later confessed, "because I kept waiting for another person I loved to vanish." Then, in 1994, Unsolved Mysteries are Unsolved Mysteries are Unsolved Mysteries. It was a blessing and a curse for the Wilsons. The show generated hundreds of new tips from around the country, each one a spark of hope. But each light did, one by one, fade. A psychic from Florida said Lucy's body was close to water under pine trees. Search parties combed lakes and ponds in 3 counties. They turned up nothing. That was the hardest part, James said, many years later. Every new theory gave us hope, and then that hope got hope your feet got falsely, got see us a ringo attack. Or Holt Gold got, or James said many years later. Every new theory gave us hope, and then that hope got suicide. In 2001, newer DNA technology provided a glimmer of hope. Detectives submitted that enigmatic brown hair for mitochondrial DNA analysis. The findings excluded the 3' suspects, but with no match in the database, the information didn't advance the case. The file was finally sent to Hidden County's brand new cold case unit, where it became part of a burgeoning collection of open-ended questions. When Lieutenant Diana Reeves came on board in 2003, she resolved to begin anew. Every shred of evidence, every interview, every inference reevaluated. "Sometimes new eyes notice what others don't," she assured the Wilsons during a subdued meeting. "I can't make any promises. But I want you to understand we haven't forgotten Lucy." Life for the Wilsons had settled into a routine of survival. Every year passed not on holidays or milestones, but on anniversaries, each another reminder Lucy wasn't coming home. Margaret took comfort in a support group for families of the missing, driving an hour and a half each way to meetings. Robert immersed himself in Lucy's memorial scholarship, interviewing students who had his daughter's aspirations of serving others. Retaining her memory became our mission, Margaret explained later. We could not reverse what had occurred, but we could dictate how the world would remember her. And then in 2008 came the 20th anniversary. The Hidden County Gazette published a 5-part retrospective. Local television stations broadcast special reports, and for a brief period, Lucy Wilson's name was on everyone's lips once more. That coverage sparked an unexpected letter from Tennessee. A woman claimed her ex-husband had once drunkenly confessed to killing Lucy. Investigators chased the lead for months, only to discover the man had been stationed overseas during the spring of 1988. Another false trail. Another dead end. That's the cruel reality of cold cases. They spring to life for an instant, then go back to silence. Hope glows, douses, and waits years, even decades, until someone notices something ever. For families left behind, this endless cycle of hope and heartbreak is pure agony. If you're watching this video and know anything, even a small detail that once seemed meaningless, please reach out to the authorities. Sometimes it's that one overlooked clue that cracks a decades-old mystery wide open. Your call could bring peace to families like the Wilsons, who have spent a lifetime wondering, waiting, and praying for answers. And before we go on, take a mic, and mirror. Take a mic. Each view, each share keeps cases like Lucy's in the public eye. Awareness can result in justice, even after all these years. By 2013, 25 years after Lucy vanished, the 3 men formerly labeled as suspects were living quiet, disparate lives, each still bearing the marks of the ordeal. Mitchell Turner departed from Hidden County after high school and established a new existence as a construction contractor in Texas. William Larson closed his auto repair shop and got a stable position at a factory a few counties away. Peter Davidson, the erstwhile banker and prom chaperone, relocated his family to Florida and worked in finance until his retirement in 2012. However, none of them ever really cleared the cloud of suspicion. You learn to live with people thinking the worst about you, Mitchell explained in a rare interview, but you never read that explained in a rare interview. But you never read very what place with bro, chicos. He's obviously in one of those very terrible, but when it you stuff, more than. But you never read Mitchell explained in a rare interview, but you never read. At the same time in Hidden County, the Wilsons endured the agonizing milestone of 25 years with no closure. Robert Wilson's health was deteriorating. His physician termed it prolonged grief response, but his family understood that it was a shattered heart slowly eroding his body. Margaret converted their living room into a shrine to Lucy. Photo albums stacked on the coffee table, her daughter's awards on display on shelves, newspaper articles stored in plastic sleeves. Mom can't let go, James confessed softly to a cousin. And truthfully, neither can I. How do you move on when you don't even know what happened? In 2015, a glimmer of hope again appeared. The Hidden County Sheriff's Department had been awarded a federal grant to reopen cold cases utilizing current DNA technology. Lucy's case file was one of the first to be opened again, but hope quickly led to disillusionment. The 1988 hair sample had broken down too much to analyze. There just wasn't enough material available. And then, in January 2016, an old name appeared again, though discreetly, in the back pages of the Hidden County Gazette. Henry Hank Monroe, the night security guard at Willow Creek Hall for decades, had passed away from a heart attack at 67 years of age. His obituary portrayed him as a dedicated employee, a regular presence at local events, a man who'd spent over 3 decades guarding that same building. Not many gave his death more than a moment's notice, but they would have. For another 7 years, his name was not known in the context of Lucy's case until the 2020s came around, a decade that saw both incredible forensic advances and renewed public interest in true crime. Podcasts, documentaries, and amateur sleuths gave new life to cold cases. In 2022, a graduate student at the University of Alabama selected Lucy Wilson's vanishing for her criminology thesis. She had one simple purpose: to scan every aspect of the original file and use today's analytical software to look at long-forgotten evidence. While scanning personnel records of Willow Creek Hall, she saw something unusual, something no one had ever noticed before. Henry Monroe's patrol log for the evening of May 14, 1988, contained a 17-minute missing segment, the precise time period during which the electricity failed as his LSU failed eld of Pralda. Hobble, what do you love during? And Charlie, to the during which the electricity failed and take a more updates is it's so are precise. She was rediscovered, and detectives found out Monroe lived only 2 miles from where Lucy's purse had been discovered. More disturbing, his brother owned land featuring an ancient well that had been inexplicably filled in over the summer of 1988. Detective Carlos Ramirez, who had taken over the cold case unit, later said what really gave us pause was that Monroe volunteered to assist in the search for Lucy. He even donated me. In many cases, that type of behavior, coming close to the investigation, can be a red flag. As the evidence continued to accumulate, detectives took a gutsy action. They contacted Monroe's estranged son in the hopes of securing a DNA sample for comparison with the degraded hair collected from the handrail all those years earlier. Following sensitive negotiation, the son complied. The results came in February 2020. 41 years since the disappearance of Lucy Wilson, the enigma that plagued Hidden County was finally resolved. The hair from the crime scene belonged to Henry Hank Monroe, the taciturn security guard who had remained there all along. What time is it where you're watching from right now? Go ahead, drop it in the comments below. A man cloaked not just in darkness, but in authority. For the Wilsons, time had long since lost its normal rules. Their reality suspended itself at midnight on May 2, 1988, while the rest of us progressed through 41 spring and fall cycles, birthdays, and Christmases. Robert Wilson, 82 years old and residing in assisted care, died before learning the truth. He had lost hope there would ever be answers. But Margaret, she phoned the detective working on Lucy's case every Monday morning, every Monday for decades. Just checking in, she'd say, refusing to allow her daughter's name to become background noise among discarded files. Then, on a winter morning in February 2023, Detective Carlos Ramirez stood outside her door, James by her side. Margaret glanced up, and before he had even opened his mouth, she breathed quietly, "You found her. Up to their quietly. You found her. What happened next would unravel decades of presumption, reveal a shocking fact hiding in plain sight, and finally bring Lucy Wilson home. But in order to grasp how a single hair could help crack a mystery that stumped investigators for more than 40 years, we must pause to admire the astonishing development of forensic DNA technology, a stealth revolution that converted that small snippet of evidence into the door to justice. Back in 1988, when Lucy vanished, DNA testing was still a brand new frontier. The first criminal case using DNA profiling had only taken place 2 years earlier, in England. The FBI's own DNA program had just launched in 1987. The process was expensive, cumbersome, and required a lot of biological material, blood, semen, or hair with intact roots, to produce even a basic comparison pattern. Back then, we needed a sample about the size of a quarter to get usable results, explains Dr. Elaine Winters, former director of the Alabama State Forensics Lab. Today, we can work with samples invisible to the naked eye. When police first took that one brown hair off the handrail outside of Willow Creek Hall, they did everything right in 1988, placed it in a paper evidence envelope, marked it meticulously, as nobody could have conceived that simple diligence would one day prove to be the difference maker. The first attempt at a test was in 1989. All that forensic specialists could reveal was that it was the hair of a Caucasian man with some gray present, information generic enough to apply to half of Hidden County's adult males. Worse, the hair lacked a follicle, so early DNA techniques couldn't even recover genetic data. Next were the 1990s, a decade that worked behind the scenes to revolutionize everything. Polymerase chain reaction, or PCR, allowed researchers to amplify minute pieces of DNA into readable evidence. By 1997, a newer technology, mitochondrial DNA testing, provided yet another breakthrough. While regular DNA is derived from the cell's powerhouse, the mitochondrial DNA is present in hair shafts even after the roots are lost. In 2001, detectives went back over Lucy's case with this method. And at last, they obtained something. There was enough mitochondrial DNA in the hair to exclude the three initial suspects, Mitchell Turner, William Larson, and Peter Davidson. But with no one to compare it to, the discovery was nothing more than a loose thread. The partial DNA profile was entered into CODIS, the Combined DNA Index System, but there were no matches. As forensic expert Dr. Marcus Thompson went on to say, DNA is only as good as the databases we compare it to. You can have a profile, but without a match, it's like having a fingerprint in a world with no fingerprints, no fingerprints. The second revolution was with SNP analysis, short for single nucleotide polymorphisms and massively parallel sequencing. These new methods were able to screen millions of genetic markers simultaneously, allowing it to pull usable profiles from samples deemed too degraded to test. By 2015, forensic labs were able to accomplish in hours what used to take weeks, and from samples smaller than a pinhead. In that same year, Lucy Wilson's case was selected as one of the first to be helped by a new federal cold case grant. Decades-old hair was prepared for reanalysis by technicians using these latest tools, unbeknownst to them that they were on the cusp of a breakthrough 41 years in the making. Time hadn't treated the evidence very well, though. Handled for decades, tested too soon, and just allowed to biologically deteriorate over time, the hair sample was now too compromised for most contemporary DNA protocols. That's one of the sad realities of cold cases, Detective Carlos Ramirez said. Quote, "Sometimes the evidence just doesn't last long enough for technology to catch up." Lucy Wilson's case seemed like it was going to be forever unsolved until two things shifted The first was the graduate students finding the suspicious 17-minute gap in security guard Henry Monroe's patrol log. The second was the emergence of a revolutionary new tool, forensic genetic genealogy, the very method that famously caught the Golden State Killer back in 2018. This method does not depend on a suspect's DNA being in a database of criminals. Rather, it matches crime scene DNA with public genealogy databases, such as those people use when researching their family histories. Even a distant relative who had submitted their DNA to a service like Ancestry or 23andMe might unwittingly assist in identifying a previously concealed criminal. Monroe was the prime suspect by early 2022, but there was one major hang-up. He'd been deceased since 2016, and there were no DNA samples of his in any government or medical records. Exhumation was contemplated but ultimately decided against. Alabama's humid, hot climate made it unlikely that usable DNA would remain intact after that long in the ground. So, researchers took a dual-pronged strategy. They'd attempt to get one final usable genetic profile out of the original hair, and they'd attempt to harvest DNA from Monroe's living family members. At the FBI's Quantico laboratory, scientists got to work. Using a process called whole genome amplification, they painstakingly copied what little DNA remained from the hair. Then came targeted sequencing, a technique that focuses on the genetic regions most resistant to decay. We find the strongest pieces, segments of DNA that are most likely to hold up, and fill in the gaps with intricate algorithms. It's science and magic. While all of this was going on, detectives in Alabama finally got a break. Through extensive legal negotiations and sensitive family contact, they were able to persuade Monroe's estranged son to donate a voluntary cheek swab. It wasn't a one-to-one comparison they were trying to find, but a genetic connection. If the DNA from the hair was Monroe's, then it should match half its markers with his son. The results came in on February 12, 2023. The evidence was 99.97% conclusive. The hair on the back stair railing of Willow Creek Hall, the site where Lucy Wilson was last seen alive, was Henry Hank Monroe's. Detective Ramirez recalls the moment clearly. When that email arrived, I read it 3 times before it hit me. After 41 years, we finally had our answer. The guy who'd called in reporting he'd discovered the short-circuited circuit breaker that evening was the same guy who'd created the blackout to begin with. Guy who'd participated in search parties and contributed to the reward fund had been searching just to ensure his secret remained a black, searching just to ensure. When investigators dug deeper, more disturbing truths emerged. Monroe had a sealed juvenile record from another state, an assault case involving a teenage girl when he was 17. The record had been expunged, which is why it never surfaced during his employment background check at Willow Creek Hall. Old coworkers recalled Monroe ever willing to cover high school functions, particularly homecomings and proms. "We thought he wanted the extra money," said one maintenance supervisor. "It never occurred to us that he had ulterior motives." This case became a breathtaking demonstration of both the resilience of evidence and the potency of science. A single hair strand, taken in 1988 and stored with caution, had borne Lucy Wilson's reality for 4 decades. And for the 3 men who'd spent almost half their lives living in the shadow of suspicion, that reality meant something intimately personal: freedom from the darkness. For the Wilsons, the DNA connection resulted in something they had nearly lost. They began believing again. They got answers. Decades of uncertainty, questioning, and pain were finally over. They knew the truth. And for those living in Hidden County, it was a wake-up call, a shock. They'd spent 4 decades judgmental, gossipy, quietly accusing innocent men of things they didn't do. The revelation made the entire community confront an uncomfortable fact about how quickly we settle for the wrong story when fear and sorrow are in control. If this narrative resonated with you, if you are a believer in the potential of science to deliver justice, please pass along this video. You may be connected to someone in your network who is related to one of the thousands of cold cases that still continue to haunt America. Each share raises awareness of how new DNA technology is rewriting history case by case. Click that share button. It could pay dividends. Now, although DNA had proven who was guilty of Lucy Wilson's vanishing, it had not told the authorities what had occurred on that night of May 1988. To construct that, however, detectives had to examine further into Henry Hank Monroe's history, his routine, and those subtle warning signs everyone overlooked. Henry Monroe was the type of man who could be in a room full of people and still go unseen. When Lucy disappeared, he was 39, old enough to be out of the suspicion pool, but young enough to blend in. He was average height, average build, thinning brown hair, and the face so generic that even coworkers who saw him every week couldn't describe him later. "He was just present," said Martha Sullivan, the coordinator at Willow Creek Hall. "Always courteous. Always punctual. Yes, ma'am. No, ma'am. The kind of worker you never have to worry about." Born in Tennessee in 1949, Monroe's childhood suggested patterns no one ever linked. Following his parents' divorce, when he was 12 years old, he shuffled between relatives in 3 states. School reports indicate constant absenteeism and problems with discipline. Then, when he was 17, came the first genuine hint of trouble, an arrest for beating up a 16-year-old girl who had spurned his advances at a cinema. The case was processed through juvenile court, the files were sealed, and thanks to a first-time offense through juvenile court, the files were sealed, and thanks to a first-time offense, it forced the worsens, that is, erased. By the time Monroe arrived in Alabama in 1979, his record was non-existent. He was employed as a night watchman at Willow Creek Hall in 1983, following what investigators would later characterize as a check-the-box background check. The references returned described a reserved, trustworthy man who kept to himself. At the time, they sounded comforting. In retrospect, they sound ominous. Monroe's routine was as regular as clockwork. He manned the 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. shift, making the rounds along the building perimeter during events and monitoring electrical systems after the crowds departed. He recorded his rounds like clockwork, always thorough, always exact. His work provided the ideal alibi, said criminal psychologist Dr. Vanessa Rodriguez. He had a valid reason to observe young women, complete access to the building, and insider information on where cameras and lighting didn't extend. And that uniform, well, it automatically generated trust and credibility. The Willow Creek Hall records speak for themselves. Monroe's patrol journals, tidily written and still kept in archives, document routine existence for months prior to the evening Lucy vanished. Hour by hour, entry re, entry re, entry re break, entry re explorer, entry re entry breeze, entry re setting, entry re breeze, reads, entry re creek, and internal and creek reese, emphasis. Boring, ordinary, until May 2nd, 1988. His 11:45 p.m. log stated routine exterior patrol, all secure. The following entry wasn't until 12:20 a.m. Power outage in rear lot. Reset circuit breaker. 17 lost minutes. Initially, that gap meant nothing. Maintenance records uncovered on the reinvestigation told a different story. Monroe had complained 3 times in the weeks leading up to prom night about flickering lights in the rear lot, each time with the electrician who worked to correct the issue. He set it up, said Detective Ramirez. He learned the system. He knew just which circuit to trip to shut down that section of power without shutting down the rest of the building. And he knew how long it would take before somebody realized what was going on. That careful planning and he staged the ideal timing, dark enough to conceal his activities, fleeting enough to appear accidental. And perhaps the most chilling detail of all, once Lucy vanished, Henry Monroe simply continued to work at Willow Creek Hall, night after night, greeting visitors, verifying doors, recording his rounds, playing it as if nothing had ever occurred. He even participated in the initial search efforts, patrolling the grounds with police, suggesting potential places to search, all conveniently located, away from where detectives now think he concealed Lucy. One of the creepiest facts. Time cards for that week indicate Monroe worked overtime, offering to assist law enforcement by providing building access and information. Then came a gesture that at the time seemed generous, but now seems. A month after Lucy vanished, Monroe contributed $50 to the Community Reward Fund for tips leading to her discovery. Forensic psychologists later referred to this as insertion behavior, a typical coping pattern among offenders who can't resist inserting themselves into the wake of their own crime, enjoying the feeling of wielding power, knowing that they have information that others do not. In the 1990s and 2000s, Monroe's existence fell into a creepy sort of routine. He resided calmly in a modest rented house only 2 miles from Willow Creek Hall. Neighbors said he was polite but reserved, a man who kept his lawn tidy but never said anything more than a hello. He never married, never dated in the area, and seldom received visitors. Infrequently, he spoke of a son from a previous relationship, but now, when he retired from Willow Creek Hall in 2003, claiming back trouble, no one really paid much attention. He found work doing an evening watch at a storage complex, a solitary position in another dark, quiet environment. More disturbing still, he kept appearing at the annual memorial services for Lucy Wilson, standing wordlessly in the rear year after year. He lived with us for decades, muttered former Sheriff Thomas Sheriff Thomas and Thor, shopping at the same stores, sitting through the same church potlucks, even sitting in on the same memorials for the girl he'd taken. The mere memory of it still makes my skin crawl. Henry Monroe passed away from a heart attack at home in January 2016. His funeral was small. There were hardly a dozen people there. The local newspaper had a brief 3-paragraph obituary mentioning his 20 years of service to Willow Creek Hall air. Nobody batted an eye. Nobody made the connection to Lucy Wilson. Not until 2023, when DNA spoke the truth he'd carried to his death. So, before we get too deep in here, what's the weather like where you're reading from? Share it in the comments below as we discuss how investigators eventually pieced together that night in 1988 and how they established Monroe's culpability beyond the DNA itself. When the DNA connection was established, detectives were confronted with a new challenge. How did it go down? They had the who, but now they had to provide the how and why to give Lucy's loved ones actual closure. Detective Ramirez put together a cold case unit, experienced detectives, forensic experts, and behavioral specialists, including 2 retired detectives who worked the initial case. We had the who after 40s left recorded seconds. We had the who after 40 term of tensionless, I casing roughly she. Your party words, I put 40 words of truth. We had the who after 40, you pour in note here. Now we had to have the how and why to finish the story and provide the Wilsons with every possible explanation. The group started by creating a minute-by-minute chronology. They acquired all the existing evidence, Monroe's work records, maintenance reports, and patrol reports, then cross-referenced them against witness accounts that night. The more they dug in, the more the picture came into focus. The restored timeline began at 11:30 p.m., May 1st, 1988. Monroe's patrol log indicated a normal exterior check, all systems in operation. 3 prom-goers corroborated seeing him outside by the ballroom windows, his flashlight beam scanning the parking lot. At 11:40 p.m., Monroe checked out a maintenance key from the security office, saying he had to inspect an outside door that was reported sticking. This little fact, hidden in an old logbook and forgotten for decades, proved important. That key opened not only the doors, but the electrical room and circuit breaker panels as well. Within the hall, in almost simultaneous fashion, Lucy wheeled around to her closest friend Donna and told her she had to get some air. At about 11:55 p.m., she drifted off the dance floor. Security tapes made at the main entrance fuzzy, black and white, and hardly readable after all these years in storage indicated nothing about her going out the front doors. He didn't get lucky, he planned it all, and the world around him blithely aided him in hiding in plain sight. This phase of the investigation validated what many in law enforcement secretly dread, how readily a predator can blend behind routine, uniform, and trust. Lucy's going outside alone that evening tallied with witness testimony that she had exited through the back door, the direct entrance into the parking lot, not the primary entrance where some other students hung about. Monroe would have seen her, says criminal behavior expert Dr. Martin Feltz. Given his patrol route, he would probably have been close to the maintenance building around then, a position that provided him with a good vantage point of the rear exit while remaining concealed from view. At 12:03 a.m., power company records timed exactly when the parking lot lights went dark. That was no coincidence. Maintenance records showed Monroe had complained about the very same lights 3 times in April, each time going along at 3:19, or each time going along each time going along odds points and slampers showed by the bullet showed Monroe had complained about the very same lights 3 times in April, each time going along Amato's shed. He practiced it, says Walter Sims, a former electrician who later went over the files. He knew which breaker would knock out the parking lot lights without killing the hall. He knew how long it would take to get to the correct panel and reset it, and he was certain the auxiliary generator wouldn't cut in outside, only inside. That intentional act left a 17-minute blackout period of complete darkness from 12:03 to 12:20 a.m., a time frame Monroe himself recorded in his patrol log for it taking him to discover and reset the breaker. Those 17 minutes became everything. This was premeditation, Detective Carlos Ramirez later added. He didn't take an opportunity, he crafted one. Darkness, solitude, power of authority, all designed to manipulate the situation totally. Detectives think Monroe walked up to Lucy when the lights were off, employing his uniform to assert calmness and authority. He probably volunteered to assist her, explained Dr. Feltz. A girl by herself in a dark parking lot would trust a man in a uniform with a flashlight. That's how he diffused her. The absence of struggle reinforced the brust the flash and struggle reinforced the Retzbuchs. The absence of struggle reinforced the Larchluflust. He saw that the florid dressed with you. You probably lost chat enforced the Slorslash. Slorslane says Lucy's purse, which was discovered hidden under a group of bushes some yards from her car, indicated a sudden, controlled kidnapping, one that had stopped before she could scream or flee. Then there was the actual breakthrough. In March 2023, the investigators shifted their focus to real estate records associated with Monroe's family. They learned that Monroe's brother, Gerald, was the owner of 5 undeveloped acres, about 12 Myprod. Myprod was the owner of 5 undeveloped acres, about 12 Myprod. In the stored permits and land usage documents, a single entry jumped off the page. In June 1988, weeks after Lucy went missing, Henry Monroe had helped his brother fill in an abandoned well, purportedly for safety purposes. That detail stopped us cold, Ramirez recalled. The timing, the location, the nature of the work. It was all too convenient. Approximately 20 feet below layers of hardened dirt and cement, the investigators discovered what they had been looking for since 1988, human remains. By using dental records, they verified what Wilson family members had both feared and hoped to hear. It was Lucy Wilson. In addition to her remains, officials retrieved a bracelet, a graduation present from her mother, and a key ring still attached to a faded Wildcats. The medical examiner concluded Lucy's death was caused by blunt force trauma to the head. It was violent and swift, said forensic pathologist Dr. Amara Washington. The wounds indicate a single sudden assault, typical of an individual of Monroe's size and stature. She probably knew who he was and defended herself. The most horrifying aspect wasn't merely how Monroe murdered her. It was the way he lived afterward, for decades, gliding past Lucy's picture in the newspaper, going to community functions in her honor, even handshaking her distraught parents amid the initial search efforts. Monroe was able to keep his guilt secret for more than 4 decades, and the whys are as intriguing as they are chilling. First, he fulfilled his character perfectly. As the security guard, his appearance at the scene raised not a single on. On the contrary, people were expecting him to be there. He was invisible because he was supposed to, says criminologist Professor James Leonard. Second, Monroe inserted himself directly into the investigation, but in methods that appeared beneficial and not suspicious. He participated in search parties, provided tips on where to search, carefully diverting others away from the actual location, and expressed just enough anxiety to appear sincere. He dictated the story from inside, says Detective Ramirez. By acting as if he belonged to the solution, he ensured that no one ever viewed him as belonging to the problem. Third, Monroe bore no apparent connection to Lucy Wilson. The three primary suspects all had some connection: a teacher, a mechanic, a classmate, but Monroe, he was a stranger. No one could identify a motive or previous acquaintance, which rendered him invisible to investigators intent on targeting individuals close to Lucy. A random attacker hiding behind his work wasn't even on our list. Then there was Monroe himself, remarkably nondescript. Witnesses hardly recalled noticing him that evening, although he was working the whole time. Some predators get away with it just because they're forgettable, states criminal behavior expert Dr. Feltz. Monroe worked hard to cultivate that blandness. No sharp edges, no distinguishing features, just another uniform in the background. And last but not least, technology just wasn't working for justice in 1988. DNA analysis was new and very costly. Security cameras were not common, fuzzy, and in the wrong locations. No cell phones to follow him around, no online trails, no credit card timestamps. The world then left a lot more space for someone like Monroe to disappear, but when contemporary investigators finally focused on him, evidence began to come undone quickly. The parking lot blackout immediately fell into place with Monroe's time that wasn't accounted for. His car maintenance history indicated he replaced the trunk carpet in May 1988, an unusual expenditure for a man who was known to pinch pennies. His attendance records documented 3 vacation days shortly after Lucy vanished, the only 3 the whole year. His ex-landlord even remembered him burning something in a barrel in his backyard, something he'd never done previously. The coup de grace was delivered from the well site. Fibers in the dirt were exactly the same uniform Monroe wore in 1988. When we put all of that together, says Ramirez, the picture was coup. Monroe had orchestrated the kidnapping, employed his authority to carry it out, and even staged the aftermath to remain a step ahead. And to make the evidence even more chilling, detectives soon found one final clue buried in Monroe's own letters. When detectives searched out Henry Monroe's personal items in 2023, 7 years later, they didn't know what to anticipate. Most of his belongings had been packed up by his son and put it you bought you and put it and you can have intake you journal or bissel exceeded purchase and put him in that teleconor your slaves but halt to tip insurance wrong which will you forget first won't say. But when the detectives started sorting through the old files and yellowed photos, one sealed metal box drew their interest. Inside, they found something sinister: years' worth of newspaper articles on Lucy Wilson's disappearance. Each article, from the initial panicked headlines in 1988 to anniversary pieces still being released in 2015, was present, and Monroe had been editing them. Pages had been marked with corrections to small facts, like he was fact-checking reporters. Others had scrawled notes that ridiculed investigators' work. On one 2008 report speculating Lucy had been abducted outside a state line, he had written, "Never left the county, right under your noses all along." These weren't trophies per se, said one of the forensic psychologists, Dr. Rodriguez, who was going over the material over the material, was going over the material who with the material over the material over the material who was going over the material was going over the materialists. Evidence to himself that he had defeated them all, that he was smarter than they were, uncatchable. For Monroe, every year that went by without being caught wasn't freedom, it was a triumph. And so while three innocent men languished under suspicion and a family waited in limbo, Henry Monroe continued his life in the same small county, reading the same tales, even attending the same memorials for the girl he murdered. Justice, when it was delivered in 2023, was 40 years late and 7 years following Monroe's natural demise. On April 17th, the Hidden County Sheriff's Department publicly declared that a DNA link solidified what detectives had long suspected. Henry Hank Monroe was guilty of abducting and killing Lucy Wilson. The case was officially closed. For the three men who had existed in a cloud of suspicion, Mitchell Turner, William Larson, and Peter Davidson, the news brought relief and heartache. They phoned to inform me prior to the press conference, Turner explained, now 54 and based in Houston. I sat down on my kitchen floor and bawled. For 41 years, people believed I was capable of something horrific. Now they know I wasn't. But who gives me those 41 years, bands, 41 years, bad with slang, with two jurors, jurors tulif, and calls for temporally as very, the resource assurances. William Larson sat mutely at the press conference, standing in the back of the room as Sheriff Andrea Martinez made a public apology. His world had been shattered decades ago, his auto shop shuttered, his marriage fallen apart, and his children growing up to have their father treated like an outcast. When the reporters approached him afterwards, Larson whispered, "An apology is just words, but I guess words are better than nothing because I guess is age words, but I guess words are better than nothing because they can be word just." Peter Davidson, who had been residing in Florida for a long while, did not come in person, but wrote a statement through his lawyer. "Truth arrives too late to heal all wounds, but we are grateful it arrived at all." For Margaret Wilson, now 78, Lucy's mother, the finding of her daughter's remains provided answers, but not peace. The family had a private small burial just 41 years and 1 month to the day since Lucy Disassigmathlus, Lucy Disassigmathlus. "I always said I just wanted to know," she remarked in her one public statement. "Now I know, and I find myself wishing I didn't. The truth is harder than the wondering was." Lucy's brother, James Wilson, found meaning in that painful resolution. He founded the Lucy Wilson Foundation, which provides funding for deep DNA testing on cold cases. "We had to wait for science to catch up to the evidence," he said. Other families shouldn't, other families shouldn't. Their father, Robert Wilson, who had recently relocated to assisted living, was also present at Lucy's funeral. He died peacefully 3 weeks later. "Dad always said he had unfinished business," James told his father's service. Lucy was that business. Once she was home, he was ready to go. And as for Hidden County, still recovering, coming to terms with the fact that the perpetrator of the crime was someone they trusted, a uniformed guard who went on to work in the community for 15 years following that evening, compelled everyone to do something painful, realized for all these decades they'd been facing the wrong direction. "We were so ready to blame the obvious suspects," says former Mayor Jenkins, "a wayward teenager, a mechanic who had access to her vehicle, a shaft who had access to her vehicle, a shaft to her vehicle, a shaft who directed a shaft, teenager, a mechanic who had access to her vehicle, a shaft, if you don't." We never stopped to look at the quiet, uniformed man, the one literally being paid to guard young people. That quiet confession encapsulates the collective shame of Hidden County, a community for decades bearing grief and misplaced suspicion. To start the process of healing, the town came together for a service at First Baptist Church. The pews were packed, air thick with emotion. Pastor Michael Daniels spoke to the congregation that had once been torn asunder by rumors and doubt. "We let suspicion tear us apart," he said. "Let truth bring us back together." Even Willow Creek Hall, the location of Lucy's final evening, decided to be a part of the healing. The owners spoke of a memorial garden dedicated to Lucy Wilson, a peaceful setting where guests could sit, reflect, and remember. They also brought in significant security enhancements and started conducting thorough background checks on all staff members. It was their way of saying, never again. Outside of Hidden County, Lucy Wilson's case has been a national symbol of how science and determination can ultimately bring about justice. Law enforcement throughout the nation now refer to the case when they argue for improved evidence preservation and greater genealogical DNA testing and greater genealogical DNA testing and greater genealogical DNA testing genealogical DNA testing gene. Case Wilson demonstrates precisely why we never really close a cold case, says FBI Cold Case Unit Director Eleanor Phillips. Evidence that couldn't tell its story in 1988 spoke loudly in 2023. That's why preservation is important. That's why we continue testing as technology gets better. The case has also brought about significant reforms in how we vet those entrusted with roles of authority. A number of states have since enacted legislation popularly referred to as Lucy's Law, mandating more detailed background checks, including juvenile record screenings for anyone employed in security or with vulnerable populations. If Lucy Wilson's tale teaches us anything, it's that justice may be delayed, but it's never completely out of reach. For each case, like Lucy's, that ultimately finds closure, however, there are thousands more that remain silent, families holding on to hope that science and perseverance will one day provide them with answers as well. So, if you'd like to see more tales like this, actual cases where truth transcends time, don't forget to subscribe and enable notifications, because every victim should be remembered and every truth should be heard. Thanks for watching, Alabama. And remember, when someone says the past is dead and buried, think of Lucy Wilson. Because with advancing science, relentless investigators, and preserved evidence, no secret stays buried forever.